Chair Wonderman,
Here.
Vice Chair Moyer. Here. Director Alba. And Director Del Bono. We have a quorum. Oh, I'm sorry, and Director Du.
I'm here and I will be attending virtually as I am sick today and did not want to share with you all. So thank you for letting me join.
I hope you feel better. Thank you. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Director Du, and I hope you feel better very soon. Would you please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I think we have a flag. Do we have a flag? There we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, God, liberty, and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Welcome to WETA's Board of Directors meeting for the month of March. This monthly meeting is being conducted in person and by video conference, and it is being recorded. To reduce background noise, all video conference participants will be joining the meeting in listen-only mode and will be muted during the discussion. WETA welcomes comments from the public. A public comment period will be set aside after each discussion period and will be accepted in person and by video conference. Video conference participants wishing to speak are requested to please email your name and item number you'd like to comment on to boardofdirectors@watertransit.org. If you're unable to send an email, you will still be given an opportunity to speak on the item after those who have signed up. Welcome. Good to see all of you. And I will make some comments, but before I make some comments, I'd like to introduce to you the fairly new city manager of the city of Alameda, Jennifer Ott. Jennifer is someone well known to WETA and to me and most of you, I'm sure, and we're glad to have you back working with us as a partner again. So Jennifer Ott. Why don't you go up to the lectern?
Good afternoon, Chair Wonderman and board members. Jennifer Ott, City Manager, on the job for 2 months. My second day, we called, along with board member Del Bono, declared a local emergency. So that was the first time I'd done that on my second day, but it's been great. For those of you who don't know me, I worked for 13 years for the city of Alameda on the Navy base and on transportation planning in particular, and worked really closely with this board, with your staff. Went to Hayward as an assistant city manager, and now I'm back as city manager, and I really have a strong value of partnership with all of our partners, but especially with WETA, where we have had a great relationship with you and have been able to accomplish a lot with Seaplane Lagoon Ferry Terminal. And I know there's in the Central Bay maintenance facility and some things on the horizon. So really look forward to working with this board and with your staff. I will say there is an item I saw, agenda item number 10, which is to have an on-call operators, which will allow some new pilot programs. We're very much looking forward to partnering with you on some of those pilot programs and being innovative and trying to find new ways to move around the Bay. So thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you.
Thanks very much, City Manager Ott. And I think with you at the helm, we're going to be doing some great things. I can see the future and it's bright. I will make just a couple of comments. First, I want to thank the Vice Chair, Monique Moyer, for stepping in for me when I was out last month. And everything indicates that you did a really great job, so appreciate that. Some words were said about the meeting going a lot more swiftly when I was not there. And so I don't believe that could possibly be true, but who knows? I'll never really know. But hopefully this one will go as swiftly as it should while we still cover ground. I did miss what I'm sure was the celebration of what we've talked about for years, which was the reaching finality on Regional Measure 3. And that is a great cause for celebration and something that has deep impact in a positive way on water transit, this agency for the future of the Bay Area. Having been involved in the design of Regional Measure 3, we set it up that way so that it would be a real opportunity for the organization not only to receive funding, that was fungible for operations and for capital, but also to really control its destiny. And so while Regional Measure 3 funds won't solve every problem for the future, they have put our agency in a different boat than pretty much every other transit agency in the Bay Area who are struggling to understand their short-term financial fiscal futures. And so I think a lot of eyes are upon us as we work through the issues around RM3 in the months ahead, because we'll want, I think if we can demonstrate that we know how to use funds wisely and we can properly plan and channel funding, it'll help mass transit in general get through this particularly challenging period that we're in. So couldn't be more excited about that. And with that, I think that's my comments for the day. So let me turn it over to Vice Chair Moyer for her comments and the rest of the board.
Great, thank you. And welcome back. Glad to have you back. It was a quick meeting, but it wasn't as fun without you. So glad you're back. I don't have anything new to report, just basking still in the celebration. So kudos, since you're here in person, kudos to you and thank you again for tremendous leadership and perseverance. So really appreciate all of that.
Thank you. Mostly it required patience after a certain period of time. Director Alba? Director Delbano?
Yeah, I missed last meeting too, so thanks. I was stuck in ice storms apparently in Austin, so. Also glad RM3 has gone through. I know how much work everybody put into it, so it's been a long time, and I know it's not going to fix everything, but I think it definitely gives us an advantage in, for building a future and having a sustainable ferry service and hopefully a growing ferry service. So, thanks.
Thank you. And I'm glad to hear there are ice storms in Austin. We Bay Area Council conducted an economic report with the support and involvement of CBRE, which we released just a couple of days ago. And what it some of you were in attendance when we released it. And what it showed is that the Bay Area really lags the rest of the country in economic recovery, especially the city of San Francisco, in a number of ways. We rated ourselves against 25 metros on 15 metrics. Things you'd probably suspect we would measure on. And, it's not fun to see yourself at the bottom. And thank goodness for Baltimore, who helped us out in a few cases where we got to be 24th rather than 25th. And Austin was typically number one in America in terms of, issues like, housing development, job growth, whole number of relevant factors. But I think we're going to turn a corner here, and I think our water transit is going to be part of that. I think a lot of negative things get said, whether it's locally or regionally or nationally or internationally, about this area. But I suspect the tune is about to start changing. I feel I feel the change and the opportunity. So, with that, let me turn it over to Director Pippin-Dew.
Thank you for that. And I agree with what you just said, Chair Winderman. I am excited to say that Vallejo was actually ranked number 6 as best places to live in the state on Forbes last month. And one of the things mentioned was the ferry service. So I'm excited about what RM3 will do for us to expand that service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So let's move on the agenda. Item number 5 is a really important item in which we're going to honor the crew of the year, but we're not going to honor them today because some of them unfortunately weren't able to make it here, and we would like to have everybody in person. So we're going to put over item number 5 till next month. So let me turn to our executive director for reports from himself and from staff. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Chair Wonderman. I wanted to report first on RM3 and just give an update to the board. We talked last month about some of the conversations we would need to have with the region at MTC about accessing the funds and understanding what we need to do to be able to do that and what that means for the agency. We've learned more about what that means for our immediate future. First of all, kudos again to those of you that were involved in crafting the specific language that's in RM3. It does allow WETA to control its own destiny. It gives us a much bigger say in the performance measures that will exist when we measure the success of RM3 investments over the years. Those performance measures, of course, still will involve fare box recovery. That hasn't gone away. That's in the language. But we have the ability to present other metrics that can be utilized to measure that performance. And we also get to decide how fare box recovery as a metric will be applied over the course of the program. MTC still gets a strong say in the process. We need an agreement with them. We need a 5-year plan that's included in that agreement to be able to access these funds. We've met with MTC staff and they've indicated a willingness to be flexible on how those agreements are structured and what's required of us. Ridership certainly is a component, but equity, our comparative performance to other systems during this time when fare box is low for everybody and ridership is low for everybody will be taken into account. We have an opportunity to build those considerations into the agreement itself, and so we will be working towards that. MTC's biggest concern, and I would say ours too, is understanding what we need in FY24. Our budget will look different with the RM3 decision right away compared to what we were considering just in January. That's true for both operations and capital. We have an opportunity to move forward more capital projects. That's going to mean that we need to have more staff resources on board to be able to accomplish that. We're just in the middle of catching up and understanding what that will mean in real terms for the budget, and we're moving forward expeditiously to make sure that we can present a budget to the board that takes all of that into account. We have a great track record at this agency for accomplishing a lot with very little resources, but you don't want to do that for too long because it will catch up with you. And so I think from a resource standpoint, we're looking at this as an opportunity to catch up and to position ourselves to do everything that we should be doing as early as possible with our resources available. So there's more to come on this, and we'll be reporting back to the board next month with additional information. With that, I want to turn it over to Terrence Caldwell, who's going to give us an update on our DBE workshop. The agency is, of course, continuing to make progress on the DBE front to encourage our contractors and consultants to maximize the level of DBE participation in our projects.
Camera here. Thank you, Director Seamus. Good afternoon, Chair Wonderman and board members. I am Terrence Candell. I am the Government and Regulatory Affairs Specialist. As Seamus mentioned, the Government and Regulatory Affairs Department hosted a workshop aimed at breaking down barriers that DBE and contractors face seeking to hire and have greater DBE participation on contracts. For some background, last year, the GRA Department, the Government and Regulatory Affairs Department, reported the achievement of our triennial disadvantaged business enterprise goal, which we did not meet. San Francisco Bay Ferry, Golden Gate, and numerous other ferry operators across the country have struggled for years to achieve their DBE and SBE participation goals. At that board meeting, staff provided the board with methods staff could explore to increase DBE participation, and the board expressed their desire to have these methods explored. So staff set out to dive deeper into these barriers for DBE participation, and we organized meetings with our most frequently contracted shipyard and marine construction firms. And during those meetings, during those meetings, we dug a bit deeper into what these barriers that not only the disadvantaged businesses face getting on contracts, but also that the primes had hiring those disadvantaged businesses. And a lot of the challenges that came up were about experience and certification, including things like special HVAC requirements that you need to do particular maritime work, special industrial painting and electrical that, again, you have to have a special marine certification for, as well as insurance and bonding issues, which there isn't a lot of information that, the prime contractors, they themselves had, and especially not the disadvantaged businesses who are trying to participate on these contracts. So what staff decided on was to host a workshop to dive deeper into these challenges and bring in field matter experts to be able to speak on these issues, provide tips and resources for these disadvantaged businesses to be able to overcome these challenges. So we had participation from the biggest shipyards and marine construction firms, some of the ones that we work with the most frequently, as well as our insurance and bonding agents that we don't necessarily work with, but those prime contractors work with, as well as Federal Transit Administration, which they came on to speak on the disadvantaged business program itself and how to navigate it, and tips and resources on navigating that. We also had our legal counsel there to provide information on the Buy America requirements, a thing that the prime contractors, the shipyards and marine construction firms we brought on also didn't have a whole lot of information on. So we held this workshop on February 15th, and we had participation from about 8 different shipyards and firms. Let me pull, I have straight information for this, but okay, so we had attendance from construction firms like Marine, Manson Construction, Power Engineering, Nichols Brothers. We did advertisement for this workshop in a few different marine magazines, and we got about 45 participants, 15 of those being participants that were presenting. So 25 to 30 of those participants shifting were firms that were interested in the disadvantaged business program or becoming a DBE or understanding how to break down these barriers as a DBE. And this is the first workshop of its kind. We work with the Business Outreach Committee to do Meet the Prime events where we bring on firms that are interested in being DBE firms, but that is on in the capacity for land as well as water. This workshop was specifically for the maritime industry, and we invited all firms from across the country to come and be a part of this. The workshop explored 4 barriers: qualifying for FTA's disadvantaged business requirements, the lack of marine construction experience and certifications among firms and at DBE firms and non-DBE firms seeking to become DBE firms, insurance and bonding accessibility, especially considering who needs the insurance, how much it costs, when you need that insurance, what kind of projects, as well as navigating the Buy America requirements. Subject matter experts in each of these categories were invited, and they presented tips, resources. The workshop was about 2 hours. FTA representatives discussed every aspect of becoming a DBE in the goal setting process. The shipyards and the marine construction firms, they fielded questions from the public, as well as some questions that we developed in preparation for this workshop to explore questions as to why they couldn't get participation. What were the biggest hurdles that they faced, and they dove into their specific experiences and provided specific tools and tips and resources in order to avoid certain things like labor issues when being hired upon contracts. And of course, navigating the Buy America requirements. For insurance and bonding, we had a few different subject matter experts talk about the many different types of liability and insurance. Many of us on the call or on the workshop didn't even know about these things, but they include things like marine liability, hull and machinery and protection, indemnity, bumbershoot liability, a massive wealth of information from insurance and bonding experts. Catherine reported on the Catherine Sue from Hanson Bridget reported on the Buy America requirements, the rules about using steel and iron in manufactured parts, and that plays a role when you talk about contracting with disadvantaged businesses that do production or that are vendors, and how they can participate or can't participate because of these rules. And so this workshop was about a bit over 2 hours, and it wasn't anywhere near as much time that would have been needed to really dive into all of these different subjects and these different barriers. But staff, we are planning to have a follow-up to this workshop at some point. We're in discussion with the construction firms and then the participants as to what that looks like, along with board feedback. And the PowerPoint and the workshop itself are on our website, and it is a massive wealth of information. If you get the opportunity, I would check it out, but it is the information is also in your board packets, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much, and appreciate your initiative on this subject. I think I've been on the board 7 or 8 years, and this has been a subject for 7 or 8 years as to why we can't, and always reporting that we're not doing what we want to be doing, not meeting goals and so forth. So really glad that you're here and you're taking this initiative and really trying to look underneath the hood, if you will, to try to find out how do we go forward from here and not find ourselves always lamenting that we didn't achieve what we need to achieve. I was going to just ask one quick question where you mentioned some of the major vendors who I recognize from the Bay Area. Were there folks there from the state of Washington or San Diego or other places where work is done, or was it just limited to Bay Area folks? Not that I mind Bay Area folks doing maritime work. We need to push that.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
and because we do so much contracting with like Washington, with San Diego, we did put that out there to the participants. The shipyards and the firms, they weren't kept to specifically like where they're from, but just the frequency of working with them and the wealth of knowledge, and also just the interest in participating in this. And that included, Bay Ship and Yacht, All American Marine, Marine Boat Works, Nichols Brothers Boat Builders, etc.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to my fellow directors for questions or comments.
So great. Thanks for doing the work. And I'm glad to hear there's going to be follow-up. Did you guys discover or get any information back specifically for WETA, our agency, what might be some of the holdups? Was there an interest from any of the participants in the group to become, to do work for WETA, specifically WETA? And I guess the third thing, and I can give you it back, but what are some of the outcomes or some of the maybe conclusions that you guys came to in the group that we can, as a board, support and put out there so we can become compliant with this? I guess that's kind of what I'm looking for generally overall.
What was the first part that you asked?
But was there any specific people on there that you hadn't seen before that are interested in coming on with WETA or bidding on contracts with WETA specifically that we haven't seen in the past? Or were these all people that we pretty much are familiar with?
There were quite a few firms and agencies. We have the master list of the participants and folks who were on the workshop that I hadn't recognized before, that haven't done work with WETA before. We actually fielded a few questions from participants in that regard as to essentially how do we get that contracted work with our shipyards. We also provided our upcoming procurements for them as well. So that would incentivize them to take this information, become a DBE, and then go ahead and find one of those procurements they'd be interested in. In particular, no one asked in particular, but the general question of how do we break into that? One of the the last bit was what our
Just basically, what can we do as a board to help support or, bring people on board? I mean, like, for example, it sounds like insurance and bonding might be a big deal. Do some of these companies, these insurance and bonding companies, have special programs that they offer to disadvantaged companies? Things like that. I'm just kind of curious to hear some of that.
They do not, and that's the rough part, is that there are not special or specific programs that are targeted at providing funding for a disadvantaged business to become a disadvantaged business. As we explored, there are plenty of costs that are associated with being a disadvantaged business and the kind of work that you do, the certifications you might require, industrial painting, HVAC, et cetera. And they would be looking for the same kind of help or assistance from an organization or the agency like FTA, for instance, which is actually really a really good reason to have had Monica McCallum, who runs the Disadvantaged Business Program at FTA, on the workshop, because she was able to hear these things, hear that lack of resources and the lack of funding for disadvantaged businesses and small businesses. So that really is one thing that staff look at in terms of being able to help these disadvantaged businesses, is funding and grants that may be procured through chambers or what have you, agencies, to these disadvantaged businesses to be able to do that.
One of the things that we can explore through a future workshop is seeing if we can work with some of the federal agencies like the Small Business Association to see if they could start up a program to help disadvantaged businesses with getting that insurance.
Yeah, because I mean, you were here for it too. We've had times where people come in and, we're not doing enough, but it doesn't, I don't know what we do as a board or an agency to help here. It seems like it's a bigger issue about licensing, bonding.
Yes, it is.
Getting things, funding for agencies. So I'm just kind of curious, where it goes from here in order for us to be able to comply in the future.
So, and I just want to clarify that. So we are compliant. We are not in compliance if we don't meet our goal. Our program is compliant. What we need to do is just figure out how to help break down these barriers. And that's part of this work that we're doing. So I think just diving deeper a little bit into each of these subjects will help us identify a path forward. It won't be just us doing it, because we'll be needing to work with the Small Business Association and other operators around the country. But at least we can help shed the light on these issues and help draw a path forward.
Thank you.
Director Moore?
Thank you for that discussion. That was really helpful. One of the things, I like your idea, Lori, on the Small Business Association. I'm surprised the federal government doesn't have that, but in the city of San Francisco, they offer a surety bond program to help with the insurance requirements. So I have to believe that there's something at the federal level. We have to find our way to the right place, but if not, maybe we could work that through. Because the city's had it. Aaron helped me here for decades. It's been around for a long time.
And that was actually one of the things that was discussed on by the indemnity and surety expert, was navigating the difference in something in insurance you would require on land versus a marine insurance.
The marine insurance.
And so it makes it
Very expensive.
Yes.
Insurance to talk on top of you. I did want to just, sorry, Jessica. I did want to just say though that there is a tipping point, and so what's the cart before the horse? Like, not having the firms signed up is probably, I mean, that's the milestone we really got to get to. And so you piqued my interest when you said that there's, just the paperwork alone to qualify as a DBE is an obstacle. And I'm wondering if there's something that we might be able to do to facilitate that, either through workshops or experts or teams of experts, because there's people all around the state, let alone the country, who specialize in that. So something I think might be a worthwhile investment for us, given, you know, what we have coming forward in our master plan, to be able to get to that tipping point so that we would have a viable argument with the SBA or whomever on a surety program or whatever.
We participate in the Business Outreach Committee, and every year we do a DBE certification workshop to literally walk through the form and walk through all the things that a person would need to fill that out, and then provide we're not a certifying agency, but we provide the staff of other certifying agencies to be there to help answer questions.
I remembered that, but they don't actually, we're still not getting the applicants in.
Yeah, I think it's about qualifying for it. And then having just the maritime industry be such a small segment of work in comparison to land-based construction.
I do like Chair Wonderman's idea, though, of extending that to the Pacific Northwest, because, or your larger committee that we have as a later item.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Director Alba.
Thanks, Director Moyer. Other comments from directors?
I'll provide a brief comment. I hear what's already being done, and it's great that we're making progress on it. The clearer in the process flow chart, what the requirements are for, especially the marine industry, the better, right? So that in addition to these checkbox or CUCP, to have a flow chart that is specific to Golden Gate and WETA.
I know. So we don't have requirements. It's really the prime contractors that
I
have the
understand.
requirements.
Yeah, no, but in not our requirements, but rather what is required of marine DBEs. Right? So the additional insurance and all of that. And so there is a very straightforward flow chart, right, of how to go about applying and what the process is like. But it's specific to general land-based work. It's not specific to the maritime industry. And so having a flow chart that includes the additional requirements if you're going to do business in maritime would be good.
We can work with the primes to see if they can help define that. Each one has different requirements, but I think we could probably put something together.
And that was something that we explored with the shipyards in particular. Some of them do have that checklist, and we got that from them. Something we might explore as, a follow-up to this is exactly that. I mean, there's so much from each category. And so, and knowing when you need the certain insurance, what contracts you need them for, it'll take some work, but that is definitely something that we'll look to explore.
Yeah, and if there are, I know that there's also a cost, both time and financial cost to going through this process that is not necessarily justifiable. So making clear what the cost is and also exploring if there are consultants that are specializing in the maritime space, so that if a larger vendor or company that we use, if they're interested in that, they can even support smaller companies that they can work with to get through the process and pay for some consulting time. Because it is just the time commitment and all of the hurdles it's hard for a small company to justify. But whatever we can do to provide that kind of support, even if it's a longer list of consultants. Anyway, just my thoughts.
Okay, Director Du, did you want to comment on this? You don't have to, but you can.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
So I'd like to propose that we put this on the agenda as a discussion item, let's say 60 or 90 days out. And, I think you really want to commend the work and the initiative you're taking, but I'd like us to do a little deeper dive, maybe bring in some organizations. I would like to hear from some of the maritime folks directly as to what their issues are, because as Lauren has said, it's not up to us. You know, we're sort of on the receiving end of this with expectations on us, appropriately so. So let's, you know, let's really dig down on this and see what we could do. It just feels like, you know, one of those things from everything that you said, that it's more complex than it should be. And so therefore we need to get our arms around it and see where we can kind of break through. And I feel we have to do that, and we should do that. So that's okay. All right, with that, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's move on to the financial statements, please.
You have report in your packet about the financial statements and the legislative updates at the state and the federal level. I wanted to invite Kevin Connolly up to give a update on ridership. We're coming out of our slow season on ridership, and we're looking forward to some real ridership growth like we saw last year in the spring. That's already started to occur, and Kevin will give us some more flavor. That's going.
From this very flattering angle of me, is there a way I can get the presentation up?
Way.
Thank you, board members. Kevin Conley, Manager of Planning and Development here at WETA. We normally, one of the benefits of the pandemic recovery plan is that we have taken on a quarterly basis the opportunity to revisit our schedule and our service plan and adjust it accordingly to the market. Something that didn't exactly take place pre-pandemic, where we were more in a, honestly, we were more in a triage condition where we just didn't have enough, you know, service to meet demand. And that was our constant challenge. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we're up to in terms of ridership and sort of and how we've adjusted the schedule moving forward, which we're going to have a schedule change in April. So you have a little peek under the hood of how we do some of these things. So bear with me if it's a little wonky. Number one, wintertime, we generally experience a slump. In the past, pre-pandemic, commute-wise, that was immune to winter or seasonality. We always saw a steady level of commute ridership. It didn't really matter in terms of rain, weather. We had that steady. What went up and down was recreational. One of the characteristics we see today is that actually commute is subject to seasonality and weather. That we've had a couple rainy weeks here. Our ridership has gone down considerably during those weeks. And part of our speculation is that people have options and discussion about coming to the office. And if it's a bad day, they work from home. So that's one of our characteristics we're planning around. Still, we're outperforming other regional operators in terms of BART or Caltrain and what we're doing. And then we've made some March service adjustments. These are actually starting in April, last week of March, first week of April, that I'll share with you in a second. Here's a couple of graphs. I'm only going to do two. So the first one is average daily ridership. 2023 is in green here, and you can see we're doing better than we were last year, which is great. We're far below what we did in terms of pre-pandemic, but you can see the arc and the trend is roughly the same, with maybe a little bit of a jump in the last week. Here is weekend ridership. And in green, you can see we're actually outpacing what we did pre-pandemic, and we're outpacing what we did last year. And so we're seeing strong demand on weekends, regardless of season. And partly that's a result of us making a concerted effort to have more service on the weekends as well as midday. So we're seeing those ridership naturally grow, but we've also seen occupancy levels, so efficiencies also grow on the weekend. It's not just a matter of more services out there, because we do have more service out there in general, but it's more just that service is very attractive. And so as a result, we've made some changes to our schedule. Most of those changes will actually be invisible to the riders. And the primary thing we do, we don't just respond to the market and try to meet demand that's not there. We also are looking at efficiency. And I need to kind of acknowledge here that a lot of our newfound ability to do this is the result of new software and new technology that we've put in place. And so we have a better ability to sort of be data-based in terms of how we analyze things. A lot of credit needs to go to Arthi Krupanand and Mike Gowerty, sitting in the back there in terms of bringing on those tools and helping us use those and understand them, not just on the ridership side, but also on the cost side of it, as well as Tim Hanners, who has our operations, has worked closely with Blue and Gold and Cruise. So as a result, our service change that we're proposing to do gains us efficiencies, which saves us $300,000 roughly over the course of a year. And that's really in two areas. One is reduction of overtime that we were seeing as a regular feature. And the second is slowing down boats, which sounds counterintuitive, but we've targeted certain trips. They're reverse trips with very low ridership, single digit, and we're able to slow down at least 4 per day, which doesn't affect our schedule, doesn't affect our peak demand, but it manages to save us close to $100,000 a year in fuel costs. And there's an added benefit in terms of just for the earth, having less in terms of pollution. So those are the savings. And with the savings, we've reinvested it into additional service on the weekends where we're seeing the demand. So there are going to be 2 extra trips in the Oakland estuary. And then we also having a midday trip in Richmond, plugging a gap that we have, a departure at noon. So those are all positive things. And we're going to continue to reevaluate our system in a concurrent basis and every quarter make changes like this. We just thought this was sort of significant enough to share with you. And from the passenger perspective, they're not going to see any changes other than additional trips. Nothing is changing in terms of their existing trips, which is always a positive. So with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you for the report. I seem to remember a slide that showed maybe of recent that we were kind of taking a dive, but BART was coming up. Is that the case? And if so, what's happening?
That was a recent thing. And in terms of recency, that was a previous month. We were kind of falling down during the holiday period and they were seeing better ridership, but that's since evened out after the holiday period.
Not that I mind seeing more people take BART. I think it's good, but I want to take the ferry too. Best way to cross the bay. Especially since we're not going to have apparently we won't have a second Trans-Bay tube. So it's going to be all ferries all the time in the future. So just take note. Directors, any questions for Kevin?
I have one question. So you said the riders won't really notice it, but we are adding a midday trip out of Richmond. And I'm just curious, how does that get advertised? Does Thomas take care of that? Or is that how do we get it out to the ridership in Richmond to?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. We will be doing our outreach tomorrow. We're planning to post the schedule updates to our website, send it to our email list for folks who subscribe to those. We'll do an onboard graphic. We typically do, there are some 5-minute changes here and there to make these trips possible. And with that, plus the additional weekend trips, we definitely want to get the word out. We'll be doing all of our usual social media, website, onboard type advertising to make sure people are aware of that, in addition to the March newsletter next week to make sure that that's well known that they have that option. And then typically what we do for Richmond specifically is we'll reach out to their homeowners associations that are near the ferry terminal, Chamber of Commerce, that sort of thing, because they can include that in their materials to get out. Marina Bay, for example, is a long proponent of the folks that live there, have long asked for more midday service and weekend service in Richmond. So they'll be a great conduit for us to get that word of mouth out.
Right. Sounds like all our bartenders should be on the weekends.
I just wanted to commend all of you on being so agile with how you're looking at this. And that is just one of the great things about the ferries is the ability to move the assets and appreciate all of our team members also being willing to fill in those gaps and move around too. So really, really pleased to see this. Thank you. I do have a quick question though. In looking at the graphic actual versus budgeted ridership, I assume that we're still on track. And though they're, yeah, on the fair revenues, because it's fallen down below what was the budgeted, so the actual ridership. Am I reading that now correctly, Aaron? Actual ridership is below budgeted ridership, but we had those peaks early in the year, so I'm assuming smooth, we're good to go.
You won't know till you know, but
No caveats, please.
we think, what happens is the fair revenue is a month behind what we know about ridership, because by the time we close the month, it'll be a month from now. Right. But right now, if you look at the fair revenue, it came in higher than anticipated at the beginning of the year. Right now, it's sort of lower than what we had budgeted, and we are anticipating that it will catch up. And our goal and our belief right now is that we will end up on January was not good for fair revenue, but we think February will catch up, and hopefully March and April will go above the line again. So we won't know till we know, but we're hoping we're on target.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Really like this report.
I'm sensing or hearing, I don't know, Monique, you probably hear things more than I do, that there are companies are pushing more to get people back in the office. There is, it's not going to happen overnight, but there's a trend in that direction. More companies are conceiving that it's not working out so well to have people remote so much and that kind of thing. So, it seems to me, maybe a really good time to remind people who are, getting gently nudged to come back, that the ferries offer a very good way to do that. That's very pleasant and safe and reliable and all of the benefits that we offer for transportation. And the other thing is, when I'm on my trip home, sometimes I don't have enough time to finish my cocktail. And I'm thinking, if we save gas, I don't mind an extra 5, 10, so I can relax a little bit before re-entering the regular world. So it's just, I don't know. There's a lot of other people on the boat who might not feel like that. Okay, any other questions for Kevin? And I think we were handling items, the financials, the federal and state legislative reports in the book. Are there any questions from the board about any of those items? I read them. I get it. Okay, let us move to the consent calendar. There's items A, B, and C. Does anyone on the board wish to remove an item from the consent calendar? Anyone from the public wish to see an item removed?
No one has signed up to speak.
Seeing and hearing not, can I get a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
I'll second.
Very brave. All right, Melanie, would you call the roll?
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Yes.
Director Alba, Director Del Bono, and Director Du.
Yes.
Item carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to item 8, approved contract award to Mays and Associates for independent year-end auditing services.
Members of the board, Erin McGrath, Chief Financial Officer. Today we have before you a recommendation to approve a contract award with Mays and Associates for our independent year-end auditing services, an amount not to exceed $75,100 for a 3-year term. Today's action would authorize the executive director to negotiate and execute the final agreement and to take any other related actions. The agreement that we're bringing to you would include 2 one-year options to be exercised at WETA's discretion, but the option years will be exercised only after the board's approval. And in the staff report, we outline why we're making that recommendation. It's because we issued the RFP in middle of December, and it went out to 66 registered vendors in our bonfire system, which is what most government entities are using these days for procurements. But we received only one proposal from Mays and Associates, who is our current auditor, which surprised me. and it's the first time it's ever happened to me. I've been through several of these. So in reaching out to the firms in the industry and in talking to even our current auditor, there, like most industry, there is a labor shortage. They're having a hard time recruiting and retaining auditors. It's difficult work. It's work that has to be done all at the same time of the year. So they, they basically work people to death, and it's a it's a tough industry to be in. One of the firms that we have a relationship with, who isn't our current auditor, but they've been helping us with evaluating our processes and procedures, basically said we are having such a hard time that we've set a minimum standard. We won't even participate if we don't think we can make a certain amount of money. And for them, that amount was $50,000. I also reached out to several other agencies to find out what was happening with them, and they were finding, most of them hadn't received only one bid, but they had received a lot fewer bids. And so for example, Marin Transit, County Connection, their value of their contracts is similar to ours, a little bit higher, but in the same range. Given that, there are a couple of options that we thought about. One was, well, should we put it back out? The problem is normally the audit season starts in May. You do an interim audit where the auditors spend about a week going through early results and doing early testing. And there's an early questionnaire that we fill out that's several pages long. And then the final audit, as you know, comes in the fall. And so in order to have enough time to get the early stage done, we just felt there wasn't enough time to put it back out. And we're also not feeling like, if there's a labor shortage, there's labor shortage, and 2 months isn't going to make a big difference. So what we're recommending today is to award the contract now for just that initial 3-year terms, which basically only gives us about a year and a half. And then we can sort of test the market and look at maybe a way to go back out maybe do a little more outreach this next go around and not automatically extend the contract. So just do the 3-year term. The other approach that we're recommending in consultation with our auditor is there are audit standards for having the same team doing your audits over and over. And so we actually could have gone another year with our current partner. David Alvey is our current partner, and they offered to switch the partner a year early just so we could have some comfort that there'll be a different set of eyes on our financials this year. And so I do know that Vicky Rodriguez is on the line if you had any questions for her. But so that is our recommendation, is to award the contract for the initial 3-year term, to know that we are going to have a change in partners, giving us a new set of eyes, and to award the contract for the $75,100 for the first 3 years. And then we can come back to you in about a year and a half to talk about re-procuring and how we would try to do a different level of outreach and try to get better competition for this the next round. Stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. When I first read it, I thought 75,000 per year for 3 years is a little pricey, but it turns out it wasn't. I didn't read that right, correct? So that's good. And I know there are standards for how long, and if the time is too short, they don't get to know you well enough, and the time is too long, they get to know you too well they don't see it anymore, and you need to make a change. So this sounds about right to me.
Yeah. I will say that they've, I have worked with Mace here and at my prior job, and they do a thorough job. They do produce, I have worked with auditors that don't get the work done on time, and you're scrambling and there's deadlines to meet. And so they've been very professional. They've done a good job. I will say during this last audit, I felt like there was more questions. I was like, are you guys punking me because I'm new? Because this list of questions is 3 times longer than the one you had last year. And they said, well, we've updated our standards because during COVID, now that most of the audits are done remotely, there's a certain sense of when you're sitting in someone's office looking at actual pieces of paper, you get to know things better. And so they've increased their questions that they've asked us. They've done more reviews than they had done in the prior year in reviewing what we did in the first few months that I was at WETA under, when Lynn had just wrapped up her work.
My CFO said the same thing last year and different auditor. So maybe there is really a change in, making sure they, are very thorough.
Yeah, with the remote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Questions, comments from directors? Go ahead, Monique.
I'm very pleased that Mays is willing to continue the partnership, and I think I think the approach is very sound, and I think the pricing is very fair. So well done by everybody.
Very good. Other directors? Any members of the public would like to speak on item number 9? Anyone signed up for that? I didn't know rate. Excuse me. I'm getting ahead of myself. No? Anyone wish to speak on item 8? Going once, going twice. So let's close off the public testimony and they'll take a motion on item 8.
So moved.
Okay, we have motion and second. Call the roll, please.
Wonderman.
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Yes.
Director Alba, Director Del Bono,
Yes.
and Director Du.
Yes.
The item passes.
Okay, let's move to item 9 and we'll start talking about fares. Authorized release of proposed fiscal year 2024 through 28 fare program for public comment.
Good afternoon, Chair Wonderman and directors. Arti Krubanan, Planning and Development WETA. This is an action item requiring the board to authorize initiation of public outreach process for the draft fare program. We have a presentation on the details of the fare program. To start off with, the current fare policy is attached with the board item. What we are bringing here today is a revised fare policy that is consistent with our pandemic recovery program's core principles. This will serve as a guideline for current and future fare decisions. And the multi-year fare program that is proposed is developed based on the revised fare policy. So the multi-year fare program, it is designed to keep parity with what other regional operators are doing and to keep pace with inflation, and also to provide predictability to our riders for both regular services and for special events. And also to continue with our goal of achieving full cost recovery for special events. The program also provides flexibility in terms of the board can at any point for any reason decide to cancel or revisit the program. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, sure. Can you hear me better? Oh, so, yeah. Is it better? So here's a summary of the fare program. There are two components. The first one is the regular services fares, and the second is the special event fares. So for regular events, regular service, we are proposing an annual fare increase of 3% for the 5-year period of the program. And for the special events for Oakland Alameda, we are proposing a one-time adjustment of 10% for the first fiscal year, FY 2024. And For Vallejo, a one-time adjustment of 15% for the first year, followed by an annual 3% fare increase for the rest of the course of the program. What we are requesting here today is to release the program to the public to get input. Based on the feedback we get, we'll make necessary changes before the board approves. And pending board approval and implementation of this program, we will monitor regularly and report back to the board. And board retains the authority in terms of whether they want to change or discontinue the program. Sorry. There it is. Sorry about that. So for the regular service component, we took a comprehensive approach. We looked at what other agencies are doing in the region, and here's our findings. So some of these agencies listed here are still figuring out what to do. And what we did is we took the best inferences that's available to us based on their modeled work or what they are proposing to do. Also, we looked at the historical cost price index. So based on our findings, we are proposing a 3% annual fare increase for the regular services, which is in line with what we have done historically in the past fare programs. So here's a snapshot of what the base fares would look like with the proposed program. The fare structure would be consistent with what we had on the pandemic recovery program, which is a 25% surcharge fee for paper tickets and 50% on discount fares. So before getting to the special events, in the past board meetings, staff had indicated that interest in terms of dynamically pricing. Based on our findings, what we are proposing is to continue with our current goal of achieving a full cost recovery. So we did an analysis, and what our findings show here is that the revenue is not keeping pace with cost to run the special event services. And in terms of projections, what we have done is we are being optimistic in terms of achieving higher ridership growth, and we are taking a conservative approach on the ridership increase estimates. And also, we did not want to increase the fares more than we needed to. So here's the snapshot of what the special event fares will look like for Oakland, Alameda, and Vallejo. It shows a one-time adjustment for fiscal year 2024, followed by a 3% annual increase for the rest of the course of the program. We will continue. We would like to continue with the current fare structure, which is 25% discount on senior, youth, and disabled fares. So as mentioned earlier, today we are here to request the board to authorize initiation of the public outreach process. And we would start with the outreach pending board's authorization tomorrow, March 3rd. And it would be a collective effort from WETA staff. There will be a public hearing on May 4th scheduled. In terms of outreach strategies, tying in with our proposed strategies on the revised fare policy relating to transparency in communicating with our riders, we have a comprehensive outreach plan. We have outlined that, basically notifying through Pay Alert system, publishing in multiple languages on our website, and also on social media, and conducting virtual open house events where we will walk through the program and get public comments. We'll also, pending board's approval, partnering with special event teams in terms of discount programs. So giving an outline of what we are anticipating in terms of next steps, we would initiate the public outreach process once pending board's authorization. And there will be a public hearing in May. And we will bring back the final fare policy and the fare program in May for board's consideration. And the program will be implemented pending approval in July of this year. With that, I will close my presentation and answer any questions.
Thanks, Arthur. Thank you very much. Obviously, a lot of thinking went into this. I have a lot of questions, but I'll try to keep it to 2 or 3. So if you go back, one of the concerns I would have is the 3% doesn't seem to keep up with the inflation, at least the current level, although you have in the chart that BART has an inflation-based increase at 1.8%. So I don't understand that, that 1.8% really goes up against everything I'm hearing about what, where inflation is pegged.
So while the inflation-based fare program shows 1.8%, from talking with their staff, what they're considering, and also what they have in terms of their financial model, what we found is it's about 3 to 4%.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
3 to 4% is what they are.
They're 3 to 4%, not
Yes.
1.8.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, this is off on a different tangent. So given that we're, part of the, challenge of getting people back to work and supporting the economy, maybe one of the reasons people either go to work or they don't go to work is based on transportation alternatives. And we offer a good alternative, but we don't, and this is part of the memo from 2011 about how we agreed way back when to look at fares. And I think we said, well, I won't read it, but something to, about discounting for folks who use it frequently. And so right now people are working maybe a couple days a week, 2 days a week. What if we thought about a monthly, a very attractive monthly amount so that we would really be incentivizing, okay, my transportation is prepaid. So I may as well go to work today, buy lunch downstairs at Barca and, wherever I am, and, start getting the economy going again. And also occupying more seats on, on the vessel, which are maybe half full on a good day and so forth. So I kick that over to you, but I'm, are there reasons why we couldn't do that? Structural reasons, or we never did it before, or we did it in Vallejo, or, we tried it here and there. What's the?
I'll defer that to Mike already.
He's on mic.
Mike Already, Planning and Development. Thank you for the question. So I think to paraphrase, the idea is exploring some kind of fare product that would kind of reward frequent users. And, we did previously have a monthly pass on the Vallejo's system that was phased out in 2013, 2014. So strategically, as an agency, as a region, we've moved towards, prioritizing Clipper as the fare media payment. Unfortunately, with the current Clipper system, we're very limited in the types of products we can offer. So we're actually not able to offer passes or progressive discounts or the types of kind of innovative fare products I think you're kind of interested in through Clipper. However, as C2, the next generation of Clipper is being developed, and it's forecast to come out in the next year. I wouldn't bet on it, possibly the year after that. It's going to create a lot of new opportunities. And it may beg for us to kind of change course from what we do today. But we really need that technology to be available before we can do that. And so I think one of the things we're structuring this program to be able to do is to, if we want to continue on the course that we're on for the current Clipper system, we can do that. As C2 becomes available, if we still want to stay on that course, we can do that. But if we want to depart and take advantage of some of the technology that's offered through C2 and look at some of those types of fair products, we'd be able to do that, and then we'd amend the program. But we kind of want to, make sure that the program becomes available, and then, have a further discussion about, if we want to go down that path as an agency, but also not only just as an agency, whether that's consistent with what the region's looking for us to do in terms of regional fair policy.
Well, nothing wrong with being a trendsetter. I think we've done it before, but I understand the technical challenge of it. But I think from an overall transit perspective, we never dealt with a situation like this before. People never worked. How many days a week am I going to work? People worked 5 days a week. Do people work 4 days a week? They went to the office to do it, and now it's a whole new ballgame. And here we are in the world of transit, and we're really part of this. This equation that has a number of variables in it, and we're like an important variable. And I just think we need to be part of the bigger strategy for the region's economy. And I think there's a role to play. So I've been hearing for years about the C2. It's time for will C2 have that kind of capability to do that?
Absolutely. And our staff team has been working closely with the Clipper team to build that capacity into they call them the business rules. So, for example, you'll be able to do accumulator passes, specific to an agency or potentially as a regional product where it does the exact same thing you're mentioning. It encourages you to use the ferry more and gives you a pricing incentive to do that. So, the 35th trip is going to be cheaper than the 34th trip.
Yeah.
The 36th trip is even cheaper than the 35th trip. That type of principle.
Well, I'm wearing my other hat. I'm going to write a letter to Andy from here. Welcome to the job, and go to work. Thanks again. Other members of the board of directors, please.
I have a couple questions, a couple comments. I guess I probably could figure out the math. It'd take me about a year, but if we took the average ridership from last year or this year, and I guess last year you'd have to look at and added, what is a 3% cost to a ticket look at for us overall? What's the number? Does that make sense? So if we're looking at a 3% increase on a ticket for this year alone, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
You're the smart one in the room.
negatory on that one. It's a little tricky because there's an elasticity involved, and I know we have somebody who has a master's degree on that, but our fare revenue is $11 million, and so you could do if 300,000 is 3%, right? So, and transit fares are fairly inelastic, so it would be a fairly, would you agree with that, Mike? You're the fare guy, yeah. So. 300.
Okay. But I think where I'm going is that what you asked me? Was where I was going with this? Where I'm going with this is if we don't have Clipper in place where we can offer incentives and discounts, to me, one of the incentives would be for this year not to do the 3% increase and go out, look at adopt it. These are just my comments. I know it's going to come back to us, but for this year, skip the 3% increase, especially when garlic salt's like $9.60 in the grocery store. I think people are going to, from a position of incentivizing and advertising, and I know you have to deal with other transit agencies on this one, but to me, if we don't raise the 3% this year and we're using it as an incentive to get people back for this year, and maybe some other people will follow. I know they're in a little bit more trouble than we're anticipating being in, but I don't, that's my heartache on this whole thing is like, I don't mind the special fare stuff. You want people to have access, but like Chase Center costs you $1 million to go to a basketball game anyway. So the people that are going to be taking the ferry probably can absorb that. But to me, having workers that are getting on the ferry and the increase in the recreational people that are taking families on the ferries on the weekend, I don't see a reason to have to increase it 3% unless we're going to go bankrupt over it. That's my 2 cents. My last comment, and if there was support from the board, I would love to hear it, but if not, then I'll sit here with my comment.
So, yeah, I think, is it the case that would, we put this out in the public, but we could, once we get it back, we can decide to do whatever we want to do with it. And so maybe to feel out how the public feels about the 3% and get those, responses from them and see if people are thinking that's not a good idea or not, the actual people who use it. I don't know, or should you want to make a motion to kill the first year's 3%? You can do it, I think.
Well, then I guess,
That's what we'll go out. to the
I guess I
public.
should let my board talk, but I'm willing to make that motion, but I think I'll let other people talk and then I'll take the
Okay.
next step.
Thank you.
Chair Wonderman, if I could just add, we are just going out and asking our riders and the public if this fare structure seems appropriate and getting feedback on that. So the board isn't approving a fare change at this time. And we will see what that feedback looks like. We did earn a lot of positive attention from our pandemic recovery program fare change. And a lot of that positive attention came from the Seamless Bay Area crowd who's interested in better integrated transit around the region and more integrated fare programs and fare structures. And that was a big part of our reasoning for aligning our fares with other transit modes, was to try and be in alignment with that philosophy. I think we were the first agency to adopt the seamless principles. And so this proposed change would try to keep us in alignment with that principle, so that we would continue to have fares that would be close to what other transit modes are operating in those same corridors. That's part of the philosophy here. So that's deliberate on our part, and it's hard to get. We're predicting in some sense where BART and AC Transit will end up, but we think we're predicting that accurately, and we think if we're off, it's going to be very marginal. If we chose to keep fares flat, we know that there are likely to be increases on other systems, and we would be out of alignment. And I don't know how that would be received by the regional fare integration and transit integration community overall. But I know they've liked what we've done so far.
Just real quick, if I don't make a motion, which I won't, because I heard what you said, and you guys did a great job. I'm not knocking anything. I think you guys did a lot of work. Could you get some feedback from them if we decide to go that route at the next time it comes before us, and let us know?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Director Alba, please.
Yeah, this is great. And it's fantastic that it's transparent, easy to understand. Looking at the proposed fare structure, short hop wouldn't actually change from its current dollar fare. The Alameda Seaplane, Harbor Bay, Oakland, Alameda, Richmond would increase from $4.50 to $4.60 next fiscal year. Slightly higher from South San Francisco with a 25-cent increase. And Vallejo is similar, 30-cent increase. I think these are absolutely reasonable. We haven't raised the rates in the past 2 years. We're all impacted tremendously by inflation and other costs associated with the past couple of years. So I think this is truly a fair adjustment to make at this point. And again, I agree with Executive Director Seamus too, that it is in alignment with what other agencies are proposing and doing right now. I think this is very straightforward. I absolutely love that we're able to incorporate the pandemic recovery principles into our permanent program, and lining up for future success. We know that this is having an impact on our fare box recovery. Where we were used to a much higher fare box recovery, and coming out of the pandemic, we're much lower. We're hovering around 20%. And that seems reasonable and more realistic than having a 60% fare box recovery goal or target. So I absolutely, I love what the agency has done over the past couple of years, and I'm so happy that we're able to propose this for the future as well.
Good. Other members of the board like to comment? Director Moyer, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I was just waiting to see if I wanted to go first. So I'll just throw my own monkey wrench into it. So I align with what both of you have said. First of all, very great work, and thank you again for the continued creativity and agility. I find myself saying that a lot to all of you, and I really appreciate that. I had a very similar reaction to you, Director Del Bono, but mine is a little different. I'm not keen on the premium for paper, because I worry that that is where we have the lower income folks, and I feel like I don't know. So I guess that's a question. Let me rephrase that. Who is using the paper system, and why is it such a big premium?
So in terms of the paper premium, there are high costs associated with handling cash fares compared to clipper and mobile fares. And one of the things that we wanted to do is we also wanted to promote other ways other ways to pay in order to make the boarding process smoother and better customer experience, which ties back to what we have proposed as one of the strategies on the revised fare policy.
Yeah, and thank you. And I get that, but here's how I see it. To the discussion earlier, we don't have an incentive program, so we don't have a program that incentivizes more use. But we do have a disincentive program to go on a singular use or not have a volume use. I understand it's more expensive to manage it. I'm just curious, like what is the breakout here, and is it really something that we need to do? Because it feels to me like a disincentive. But your expertise, not mine.
We means on. Okay. We do have survey information on the types of tickets used, and we could cross-reference that with some of the demographic information to give some insight into who's using these tickets. It won't be perfect information necessarily because it's a voluntary survey. It wasn't like a polling thing. We can bring that information into a final report, into the final program that we proposed to the board in May. We unfortunately don't have it available right now. If it was okay, perhaps we can take the next month and think about an approach on this. I think you raise a good issue, like how much of a problem is it to deal with these tickets? Should it be something we're disincentivizing? Particularly if, a demographics using them that we want to appeal to and have more of them, more people from the demographic rider system. However, I think there are some other considerations. Arthi mentioned customer experience. We try really hard to create an efficient boarding process. And, if we're putting paper tickets on the same kind of financial plane as some of the products that allow people to get through the fare gates faster, we may be creating a negative impact overall in terms of the speed at which people can get on and off. So perhaps we can kind of, as a staff, kind of think about this over the next month, and we'll kind of inform you of what our recommendation is when we bring the final program back.
So thank you. I would welcome that, because I also worry that the folks with paper tickets might be potential new riders. And it feels to me like a disincentive, but again, I don't have any sense of many we are, what the volume is of the paper tickets, who's the users, et cetera. I tend to think that the majority probably, because we're all so used to tagging on, tagging off, whatever the case may be, that I would hope that that's not a very big population, but just something it's jumped out at me since you laid it out so nicely on the page for that. But I do want to say I am supportive of I mean, I think our coalition or our partnership is really important, and I am supportive of that. I have my doubts about how we're going to get through the next 18 months, since we're talking about fiscal year end, for all fiscal year 2024 without seeing more increases in our fellow fees, quite frankly. So I'm not sure that, while I like that goal a lot, I'm not sure that's a goal that holds for 18 months. So it's fascinating, So thank you for taking it on our behalf.
Thanks, Director Moyer. Other comments from board members? Okay, Director Du, did you want to comment?
No,
Hard for us to see you here. You're small on the screen, much bigger in real life.
Yes. No, I mean, I appreciate what's been said so far, the focus on incentivizing ridership and, the small incremental increases and potentially considering waiving the 3% increase for this year. I look forward to seeing what the outreach brings back, and yeah, I just appreciate what's been said so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members of the public on this item?
Loriana Castro.
Long time no see. Go ahead.
Yes, hello.
Oriana, go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, directors, Chair Wonderman. I wanted to share, I went to Scandinavia over the holidays, and in Copenhagen, they had a wonderful ridership experience for public transit. And basically, when we got to the airport, there's a booth, and they have a big sign about just dial this website on your cell phone, and you can buy a transit card for as many days as you wish. And depending on the number of days, the price goes down. Okay, so it's exactly addressing Director Wenderman's option of giving an incentive for people to get sort of all you can ride pass for as many days as you wish. And when you're a tourist, for example, like we were going to be riding a lot. So we wanted that option and that incentive, rather than get on board each individual transit agency separately and get a ticket separately for each transit. So it worked for both the underground rail, the trains, the ferries in Copenhagen, and it was a QR code. So as soon as you purchased that on the website, you downloaded the QR code to your cell phone, and then on each transit ride, either the gates or the ticket, similar to the airport, was controlled by a scanner. And you just you held your QR code up to the scanner, similar to when you get on a plane nowadays. You just scanned it, walked right on. It took 2 seconds. Nobody questioned you. When you were on an actual physical train, like Caltrain, there was a conductor that came by and just scanned your ticket with a handheld scanner. Again, it was with a QR code. You didn't have to remember to bring your Clipper card with you. You didn't have to remember how the system worked or what it was going to cost, because you already paid for the day or the week or the month. You had already paid for that. You don't really even consider what the pricing on each travel, each trip was going to take. And I found it to be such a relief as a new rider in that city that I was unfamiliar with. They made it so easy. And well, in Copenhagen, they actually partnered with the museums, and it also got you into all of the city museums. So that was a bonus. But as far as the transit issue is concerned, I just thought, why can't we do it that way here? So I don't have anything against Clipper cards, but you have to remember to bring them with you and have to remember to preload them with what money and so forth. And I just thought we could do it a better way. So I'm sharing that. Hope you can take it into consideration. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I think what Mike said earlier applies, is that we're all part of this Clipper system, and this is how it works. And it's supposed to work better in the future, because we know when we travel around to other places, some in the United States and some abroad, it's much more sophisticated. Your options are better, it's easier, and it makes more sense. So I think that's probably for the future, for us to really be thinking about the applications that should become available to us down the road. Director Alba?
Yeah, thank you so much, Loriana. I appreciate that comment. And going back to what Chair Wunderman was saying at the beginning, having some kind of capped fee fare at the end of the month or by the week, or monthly pass that is realistic considering the 2 or 3 day work week in the office that we're seeing in the future, is definitely something that we should continue exploring. And then, of course, working with the region. So now we do have the pilot Bay Pass in place that is piloted right now around, among a number of colleges, both CSU and UC and one of the state colleges. And as well as some of the low-income housing along the peninsula, and I think also in the East Bay. And that Bay Pass provides completely free transit on the 24 or so transit agencies that are on the Clipper system. And so that will be continued to be explored and assessed, the costs associated, revenue split among the agencies, and the success of the program in comparison to just paying the regular Clipper fare or having, for instance, an AC Transit Easy Pass, but not a discount on BART, et cetera. So I'm hoping that in a future meeting that we can take a look at, have we had riders on WETA that use the Bay Pass, as well as what the status and expectations are of the Clipper Start program, which is the low-income fare discount program that has been in place over the past 2.5 years. It expires in July, according to the website, and the question is if it's going to continue or if we have an update on that, and what we can do to increase the use of it. I know that it's hard to meet the requirements for eligibility because you have to have a fairly low income while traveling, right, while commuting. And so it may not make sense for a lot of people, but still would love to just get an update on both of those programs at some time in the future.
I can just give a quick update on the Clipper Bay Pass. We have had, since it was launched in September, we have had about 1,500 riders so far, and predominantly from San Francisco State University, and which is still less than about 1% of our riders, but we have had good participation. For the Clipper Start program, there's a working group discussion in terms of extending the program for the next 2 years. And at this time, the MTC staff is going to be evaluating the eligibility requirements and also in terms of the financial model. So there will be an update to the board once we get action items from the working group.
Great. Thank you so much, Aarti.
Okay, thanks. Other members, thank you. Other members of the public wish to comment on item number 9? This is your moment. Okay, if not, let's close the public testimony. Great comments from the board. And Loriana, great. This is what's good about a board is, your staff have developed a really good plan, and it's sort of our job to pick it apart, but then to take some kind of action. So I'm going to look for a motion from the board on the item.
I'll make a motion to move forward.
Thank you. Is that a motion? Do we have a second? Motion, and we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Can we call the roll on item 9?
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Yes.
Director Del Bono. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Alba.
What did you say? Del Bono.
I'm sorry.
Uh,
I was gonna say the same
That was
thing,
a-
yes.
That's my fault.
I'm used to people voting for me. Yes.
And Director Du.
Yes.
The item passes. That was a trick.
Good one. Excellent. Item 10, authorized release of requests for proposals for emergency response and pilot program ferry services.
Thank you, Chair Wonderman. Again, Kevin Conley, Manager of Planning and Development. The staff is recommending that the executive director be authorized to release a request for proposal for an on-call list of vessel operators. The list would be good for 5 years. Once the list is created, there's only one list, but the list would have 2 distinct purposes that we foresee. The first is fairly straightforward, which is emergency response services. It's something we have sought for a while now, which is to speed the process in an emergency of us calling upon a private operator to supplement WETA's own assets and staff. And then the second purpose is not as straightforward, but is the anticipating pilot type of services that we may want to engage in, particularly in the next fiscal year. And in the memo, it illustrates one that we know for sure. We are working with a team right now in the Oakland estuary, on both sides of the estuary between the city of Alameda, the Port of Oakland, as well as employers there, where they're interested in seeking a 3-month trial run of a cross estuary shuttle. And the challenge for WETA to manage such a service is that we don't have vessels available. The vessels that we may have available are not really appropriate for the type of service that they're operating. So this would be one crystal clear potential use of an operator list. And we would anticipate that there are others coming into the near future, particularly with RM3 opening possibilities for us for operating and trying new things in terms of operation. So that's the overview of it. I will say that this structure has been a helpful structure for WETA and the staff in other areas. We have never done it with vessel operators, but we do it with professional services. We do it with engineering firms and planning firms. And in a similar vein, when we have an unanticipated need that we need to just have a task and ask a specialist to come in and help us with something like a float rehab or an unforeseen planning issue that crops up, it's nice to be able to call upon a list, and allows us to be more flexible and more responsive and reactive. So with that, I can open the floor to any questions.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think it's definitely of the time to do something like this. See a lot of logic behind it, and there's a lot to it that creates an efficiency of operation here that makes a lot of sense. I have a couple of questions. So on the 5-year list, 5 years, pretty long time. And in year 2.5, somebody in this room or in the audience decides they're so excited about ferries, they open up ferry company, and they're really got great boats, and they've got, great crews, and they would meet the original test under the proposals probably, but they wouldn't be on the list. Would they be able to get on the list, or they have to wait another couple of years to get on the list?
Yes, so a similar dynamic has occurred in some of our others situations, other on-call task lists. And what we have done is go out for a new list. We keep the existing list eligible for the original 5 years that we had committed to, but we do a second call for perhaps 2.5 years, if it's 2.5 years, to kind of supplement and amend the existing. It does require another, two stops with the board to authorize such an act.
Sure. It just seems as if, given RM3 and the kind of fluidity of the economy, there may be a lot of reasons why folks who have stayed out of the realm might want to get into it, especially if we're a working partner with them, which historically we haven't really been doing. So that's the first question. The second question is on the emergency. So I like the idea of coming back to the board. So you do the request for proposals, you get the executive director chooses, somebody who's on the list and then comes back to the board for approval. I like that. But in the case of an emergency, that doesn't seem to be a very effective way to go about it. I would think the executive director would need to have the authority to just go do the people's business and tell us about it later in a real emergency situation. So what about that?
Yeah, and it maybe, that's a great point, and maybe we weren't as clear as we could be in the staff memo, but there is a distinction. Under an emergency, the executive director does have emergency powers, and we would just be able to, bring somebody on. What we committed to in the board memo was in the instance of the pilot, which is a more premeditated action, we would come back to the board because there would be a contract, and it's not something that we're doing under emergency circumstances. It's something that.
Yeah, I think it's good practice to come back to the board because circumstances change and there may be concerns and, this is the place to kind of air those things out. Fellow directors.
Yeah, looked at, I'm supposed to go second, so. I agree with the emergency part and on the pilot part, I'm supportive of it. Well, there's a couple things that I won't, before I say I'm totally supportive of it. Just some assurances when they come back. We ran into this a couple years ago where we had a contractor out there who was not providing the same quality of service, was not complying with the same quality or standard, not just from how they operated the company, but how they paid their employees and compensation. I think we have a recent, better example to point out when we worked with all our partners and collaborated with everybody who was involved to make sure that the company that Prop SF, came up to standard to what our board had wanted and our other partners out on, our deckhands and our captains and our friends in labor wanted to see a standard put out there. So I just want to hear, I don't know if we need to come up with a standard list or we go through this procurement process if somebody comes on board and then we do it, or if we need to set it out or how that would work. I know we can't put standards. I know the lawyer over here is jumping over me, but we can't put standards to what it is, but maybe something where we can, at least give some type of direction, prior if that's allowed. So that's my only concern. I think the emergency part is a no-brainer. I think you should have the authority to do that. I understand that, but this other part, I'm going to be supportive of. I have questions about that.
So Director Vogel, I'll just jump in just to clarify and to reassure you, the action you're being requested to do now is just to issue an RFP. Then you'll have a second chance to, presumably the staff will come back and you'll be asked to award contracts, to approve contracts to all the firms on the list. But no task order to a firm on the list will be issued unless the board establishes a pilot program. And I think the creation and approval of a pilot program is then this board's opportunity to decide all the issues related to what it wants to see as part of that pilot program, which would be a precursor to engaging the services of an operator on the list. I don't think anybody's asking for the kinds of approvals that you're suggesting you want to reserve judgment on, and I think there will be time to do that.
Thank you.
So following up on that's really common in the marketplace to be able to put standards on and then hold a quarterly business review, and within your contract you have to be in good standing to continue the contract. So is that allowable?
Sure, and I think that will, I'm not sure exactly what the issues are, but the folks that will be on this list will sign sort of umbrella agreements with WETA that will include all of WETA's standard contract terms, which may be what you're talking about.
I was actually going a step further. So say we launched the pilot and an individual provider. At that point in time, we'd have a contract for performance. That performance would have, you'd have to be in good standing. You'd have a covenant for good standing, or then you'd have remedies,
Exactly right.
right? And then those could be enforced through a quarterly business review process.
Exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
That's what we did a number of years ago, if I recall, with Tideline when they wanted to use Harbor Bay. And we set out a bunch of standards and they had to basically meet them. Is that right?
That had, well, it was just, that had to do with landing rights,
Landing rights, yeah.
not operating a service. But
Right. But the notion of setting out standards that they would have to live up to, we did that, even though it was for different purpose.
Did you have a termination right, though, if they didn't live up to the standard?
So,
In that case, we adopted a policy for landing rights at our facilities. The land and the policy included certain standards.
But did you have a termination event in the event that
wasn't.
they didn't live up to the standards?
It was not.
the two different issues. There's this policy, which WETA, this board has authorized the executive director to issue a landing rights permit to anybody who will comply with those policies. That permit does include, the landing rights permit for sure includes free and easy termination rights, regardless of what the policy consideration.
Right, okay. This is an operations agreement. This would be an operations agreement, right?
This would be an umbrella agreement under which umbrella, if the board so approves, WETA could issue a task order for a particular project subject to the conditions that this board attaches.
right. Because we don't know what the project is until we see it. Other members of the board on item number 10.
Other than great dialogue.
This is an evolution, part of an evolution. Members of the public on item number 10, do we have anyone signed up to speak on it?
No. Oh, Robert.
Robert, go ahead, I see you.
Hi, Robert Estrada, Regional Director of the Inland Boatmen's Union. And first of all, I'd like to say that I really appreciate hearing Director Del Bono's words, because in large part, they'd be channeling my sentiments. You know, I mean, the emergency side, you know, feels a lot safer. The other part, well, I understand it and we'll go with it. There's more unknowns for me as a labor representative, of course. I would say some of that was spoken to, and I appreciate that as well, as far as, you know, the steps intervening between now and any potential agreement that could occur. But I just really want to underscore the fact that, you know, that labor's interests would be really important to consider here. There's no reason to think that this board wouldn't see it that way. You always have. I appreciate that. I would just also like to say that, you know, I think our primary contractor, Blue and Gold Fleet, you know, they do a wonderful job. They're a great contractor. And I would just really hope that, you know, again, that they're the first go-to, that they're incorporated into all this, and that they aren't forgotten in any of this process either, because I think they should be the primary go-to first option. So beyond that, you know, we'll see it as it rolls out down the road, but those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. Other members of the public signed up on this one, Melanie? I can't see
No one else
any
has
hands
signed up to
raised.
speak.
And anyone who didn't sign up, wish to comment, speak, question, cajole, anything? It's your opportunity. Okay, let's close the public comment period and take a motion on item 10, please.
So move.
We have a motion. Can I second it? Am I a seconder or do?
Second.
You need some? Oh, yeah, I'll second it. Why not? I should do something. Can you call the roll on 10?
So Chair Wonderman, were you
Yes.
second or did I was
A
Director?
second and.
Okay,
and-
great.
and a-
Thank
and a
you.
vote.
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Yes.
Director Alba, Director Del Bono,
Yes.
and Director Du.
Yes.
Item passes.
Thank you. Business plan focus area number 2, emergency response. And this is an information item, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Melanie. Information item, update on the business plan. I'm going to kind of kick it off just with some framing and then turn it over to Gabe Chan to run you through some of the good work he's done on this area. So 2050 service vision and business plan, a lot coming to you in the next few months, kind of beginning with this item here. Just in general, for the service vision piece, which we think of as the what, our schedule is showing potentially bringing a preferred option to you in June. And that would follow a workshop that's scheduled in April. Once that's in place, we would move to the actual business plan part of the project, what we think of as the how, and really work on that over the second half of this year. Hopefully have something in place to begin spending some of this RM3 money later by the end of this year, early next year. So agenda today, I'm going to give you a really brief update on some of the recent work we've done with the business plan. And then we're going to kind of go into a targeted discussion on emergency response. And this is the first of what we hope will be several over the next few months as we move forward with finalizing the business plan, several targeted discussions that will relate to the different focus areas we have for the project. So if you'll remember some of the other categories we have organizational capacity, financial capacity, community connections, regional transportation network, environmental stewardship. We're hoping to have a similar type discussion as we will today on emergency response, to give you an opportunity to not make decisions. We're not looking for any decisions today. Give us your feedback, give us your direction, so we can work with that and really develop these areas and incorporate them into the business plan so they reflect what you want. And we can also, communicate the direction you give us with the stakeholder outreach that we're doing between now and the adoption of the final plan. So just a very brief project update. You're going to see a lot more detail on this in the next few months. We had our first project workshop last August, and we brought to you a series of network expansion concepts, really options for what will ultimately be the service vision. And so just a reminder, in addition to what we operate today, we characterize Plan Bay Area and then 2 options, that would go a step beyond Plan Bay Area, the core focus and coverage focus option. This is kind of a nice graphical representation of the option. I'm not going to go into too much detail. That's what we do today. The bold white lines represent Plan Bay Area. So this is the expansion plan that's currently on the books. And then we have these 2 new concepts that we've been kind of doing some evaluation on, meeting with our stakeholders to get their input on, and they are the core focus network. So this is basically doing more, largely within the general service area that we currently operate, and then a coverage focus option. So this is doing more, expanding our coverage along the bay to areas further north, areas further south. In addition to those 3 network expansion concepts, we've adopted a scenario planning approach where we kind of acknowledge we don't know what the future is going to look like. And so we've developed 4 potential scenarios for the future. And ultimately, we're evaluating each of those 3 options against those 4 futures, and ideally identifying the one that performs the best across the largest number of futures, which would be the most resilient option. And so we're in the middle of doing that evaluation right now, vetting it with our stakeholders, and the results of that we're expecting to present to you in April at the workshop. Some of the outreach that we've done, we've met with both the business advisory group and community advisory groups in the past month. We've met with 6 different county working groups that we've established throughout the current service area and potential future service area that we have. And then we've released an online survey, and that's been out for about a couple weeks. We have over 3,000 responses. So we're really, really happy with the results of that and looking forward to hearing what the public at large in our service area and in our expansion areas have to say about the priorities for WETA. So we're going to kind of pivot here towards our targeted discussion on the second focus area we have for the project emergency response. So this is, again, 2 of 6 focus areas that we have here. And, just reiterate, we're definitely not looking for a decision today on any of the kind of options that we're presenting. I'm just looking for your general feedback in some direction so we can further develop, potentially some of these ideas that we're putting out there, bring it back as part of the service vision and business plan. So, just to kind of set the stage for the discussion, this is the underlying language of the focus area. And we came about this through the outreach that we did over the last year and a half with our stakeholders. Emergency response, I'm not going to read the whole thing here, obviously, but the idea is to generally define goals. Goals for what we're going to do as it relates to not only functionality, but also capacity and reach. To evaluate whether the way we currently do things for emergency response is adequate to meeting those goals. And then lastly, in general, if we're going to go with a different approach somewhat, and Gabe's going to kind of show you some of the options we're thinking about, what would that require in terms of resources and potentially organizational capacity? So with that set up, I'm going to turn it over. One more slide. Beyond using our stakeholder outreach to set up the focus area for emergency response, we've been in communication with groups since then, and just want to report some of what we've heard from our stakeholders relating to emergency response in that discourse. In general, they're interested. They want it. There's a demand for it. They want to see WETA provide more emergency response capability in terms of reach, in terms of capacity, and in terms of functionality. There's an acknowledgement that we're very limited in terms of our reach for the North Bay as well as South Bay. And then, we concentrate our services in some corridors, but not others, perhaps. And then just lastly, this is just what we've heard to date from our stakeholders. There's a desire for more flexibility. Right now, the way you get emergency response capability or capacity is to have a viable transit project at hand. So that's a project that has enough market potential where we can operate the services as we traditionally operate them and build a service comprised of terminals and vessels, that will ultimately double as an emergency response facility. So I will now truly turn it over to Gabe to kind of walk you through some of the work and thinking he's done on the topic.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So here's kind of an overview of what we're going to cover today. Goes over some of the background of emergency response of the agency, kind of what we do now, and then some different network expansion approaches that we might pursue going forward on the horizon of the business plan, which goes out to 2050. So currently, the jurisdiction and resources that WETA kind of has under its umbrella, we have the authority to coordinate emergency response activities on the water and with other transit operators in a declared emergency, especially on the bay. We act as an emergency response coordinator, but there's no ongoing state funding for emergency response preparation. So that's a key point that is kind of instrumental when we think about going into the future. And so as it works right now, WETA seeks reimbursement for any emergency response costs that it incurs in an emergency. And then in terms of the fleet, we have, of course, the WETA fleet, and then our contracted operator Blue and Gold, as well as potential other private operators that we might have on an on-call list through the RFP that you just heard about minutes ago. We also have a mutual aid agreement with Golden Gate Ferry, and then we also have kind of partnerships with the U.S. Coast Guard and other emergency response entities in the region. So capital funding, in 2008, we got 250 million in Prop 1B dollars, and this was over a 10-year period. It's funded capital projects that have built up the emergency response capability of the agency. But aside from that, it's also helped build projects that serve the everyday transit riders that use our system. So this includes the maintenance facilities in Central Bay at North Bay, the downtown San Francisco expansion, Richmond, South San Francisco terminals, some fleet procurement, as well as emergency floats at Pier 48 and a half. And so a key point here with the Prop 1B funds is all of these projects have served kind of a dual purpose up until this point, where there is an emergency response capability, but they also serve a very integral transit function within our system. And moving on to operating funding. So there's no current ongoing operating funding source for emergency response preparation, as I mentioned. It's only dedicated towards transit operations. And so in the event of an emergency, the agency would need direct streams of funding or potential increased operating expenses in the immediate aftermath of an emergency. And some public assistance sources that we get for reimbursement, which can come months or even a year after the fact, include FEMA, FTA, and FHWA. All right. So currently, WETA's role kind of in the region is mainly on the water. We partner with MTC, who deals with a lot of the landside emergency response for transit. We also coordinate with all of our assets that we have under kind of our umbrella, including our fleet, partnerships, et cetera. And then we also report up to Cal OES. So this is just a quick overview of kind of what happens in an emergency. We have the triggering event, the response that follows, deployment of resources, and then the recovery period that follows after that, whether that be maybe 5 days in the short term or longer if it requires movement of first responders or if there's some critical infrastructure that's down for maybe a week or a month or more time. So right now, in terms of organizational capacity at the agency, we don't have any FTE dedicated towards emergency response preparations and activities. And by this, we mean we don't necessarily have one like emergency response manager or a team of people who deals with that. At other agencies like SFMTA, they have kind of a person who is in that role. And so currently, emergency response preparedness work is spread across all the various departments that we have here. So government affairs, planning, marketing, communications, we all kind of dip our hands into the emergency response preparedness. So just wanted to mention the recent and upcoming EOC exercises that are coming up. So key point here is that there has not been a declared emergency requiring full EOC activation since the creation of the agency. That's key. In the COVID-19 response, we did have a partial activation with 2 positions, the liaison and public information officer. And then we do, of course, these twice a year full EOC activation exercises. And so we had one in June 2022, another in December 2021. And then we have 2 exercises upcoming this year as well. So it's not like the agency is not actively working towards being prepared in the event of emergency. It's just we haven't had to actually deploy the full EOC to date. So now we're going to get into kind of the fun stuff, the network expansion approaches. So kind of to frame it, right now, our current capacity in the fleet is about 6,000 seats. That's just kind of the total fleet that we have right now, taking into account kind of the immediate fleet procurements that are happening in the next year. We can serve about 4 to 8% of peak hour Bay Bridge capacity in that corridor. So that includes BART tube, the Bay Bridge itself, and then any buses that go across the Bay Bridge as well. And then we also are able to reach 4 regional super districts. So think about San Francisco, East Bay Shoreline, Vallejo, down to Harbor Bay, et cetera, in South San Francisco. So scenario one is kind of, we just continue what we're doing right now, where all of our projects kind of have this dual function of being a transit facility that also has a secondary emergency response capability. And so a key point here is that all of our transit projects are built to essential facility standards. And these are kind of standards that ensure that the facilities can withstand like a major disaster, like a tsunami, flood, earthquake, um, things like that. And so the costs that are associated with building those projects to those higher standards is a little bit more than, say, a temporary float that we can just stick on the bay and have transit service running within a couple weeks or a couple months. And so the other thing here to note is that current terminal locations have to be operationally feasible for passenger service. So there's not really any precedent so far for a WETA project where it serves mainly an emergency response purpose. It has to primarily have a transit focus, and then the secondary kind of function is emergency response. The second approach that we're investigating is looking at a future where the agency prioritizes kind of the limited funds that we have for transit to more of these kind of lower cost transit projects that we can deploy kind of faster than we currently do. So this means that potentially new terminals, we won't have to build them to essential facility standards, or we won't have to build every single new terminal to essential facility standards. We can right size some of our vessels for the services that they're going to operate. So if that's going to kind of a lower demand corridor, maybe having smaller vessels that operate there. And then we'd still be strategic about what facilities still have that emergency response capability. So for example, if we have a Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville set of terminals, maybe one of the three has the essential facility standards built into it and the other two don't. So the key benefit here is that pursuing an approach like this would allow the agency to have some cost savings and time savings in terms of constructing the projects. That of course is speculative at best, but the potential is there. So another kind of approach that we're investigating is looking at an increased focus on emergency response in like emergency response projects where that's kind of their primary function and the primary rationale behind it. And so a key point here to recognize is that because there's no kind of dedicated emergency response funding source, it would require the agency to actively pursue a new capital and operating and maintenance funding source that would allow us to these projects into the water. So the existing kind of transit funds would still go to the projects that, the type of projects that they go to today, but we would identify new sources of funding to kind of deploy a project that say might not be viable for passenger service with our 400-person boat, but would serve a key purpose in kind of the emergency response network in the Bay Area. So one example that might come to mind is like across the Carquinez Strait, say going from Benicia to Martinez or something along those lines. That's kind of a corridor that if the bridge goes down up there, we don't have right now a service where we can actively get people across that gap. So that's kind of one key, I think, benefit that we would reap from an approach like this. Of course, there are the drawbacks where it does require kind of identifying new funding and then also kind of adjusting kind of our project delivery model in terms of how we do things. And then lastly, there's kind of a take everything and push it all together kind of approach, right? We can pursue some projects where we can deploy them really quickly and not build them to essential facility standards. Those would be kind of classified as our transit exclusive projects. We would have some projects that still serve both functions like we do today. And then we'd have some projects where, you know, emergency response capability is their kind of primary rationale behind them. And so kind of what the staff is saying is a model like this would allow greater flexibility in terms of project delivery, right? We would be able to consider projects that might not have a viable kind of regional transit passenger function, but they would kind of serve that emergency response. And then, of course, to pursue kind of this hybrid approach, we would still need to identify that new source of funding that would allow us to build emergency response only kind of facilities. So that includes capital and operating and maintenance funding. So with that, let's go into some discussion. We have some prompts here for you to consider. So should WETA consider alternative approaches to emergency response in terms of network expansion? And then if yes, what goals or outcomes should we prioritize? And then also feel free to ask any clarifying questions as well. There's a lot.
Okay, thanks very much. A good thought-provoking presentation as it's intended to be. And I don't know that anyone, well, I can't speak for anyone else. I don't have the, a ready answer for it. There's logic behind all of the four options. We're in the days of the hybrid, so, kind of lean toward that. But I will say, I was part of the original discussion when we created WETA and did the legislation that bore, that created this organization. And at the time, it really, the emergency response capability and responsibility was really core to the thinking was Ron Cowan who envisioned this and sort of pushed it along. And some of that was based at the time, I think, I think on the merits of the necessity to have, to remember the place we live and what ultimately will happen and then what will happen then. Because as you pointed out, there hasn't been an emergency called yet, but you suspect one of these days it'll happen. And when it does happen, it could be, really something. And our current capacity is only a few percentage points of, traffic carried by the bridge and those kind of things. But I also thought, believe, at the time he was thinking about federal funding after 9/11, and that by putting the organization on that bearing, we would be susceptible to applying for and receiving support that never, never made its way our way. Maybe because we didn't try, or maybe the funding dried up, or whatever it was. So I'm open to revisiting the question of, exactly what is our role. I think we have an emergency response role. I think, uh, I'm proud that that it's part of our core competency and that we engage in exercises and, we're part of a team and we work with OES and other, Coast Guard and other agencies, and they know that we exist and that that's part of our purpose. And, I think there is, for all public agencies, whether you're funded to do emergency work or not, or even private agencies, it's, we all have a bear responsibility to step up in the event of a catastrophe. That becomes your first priority. So, no way do I think, we should ever stand down funding or not. Uh, but it would certainly be a good conversation to have as to whether we should step up. If would it be do we create value by having more responsibility? The notion of building emergency only facilities, I think really would be a function of having resources to do that, directed for that purpose. So I'll stop there. It's great, it's great food for thought here. I'll turn it over to the board.
So I do have like some thoughts on this. One, to answer your question, I think the approach we've been using is absolutely probably the best approach that we could continue to use, is looking to where we have a transit need and building that facility there. Because more than likely, like Jim said, what's going to happen is either there's going to be a massive earthquake in the region where we're going to have to get people back home, or we're going to have to get supplies in and emergency workers in, to where people are at. And routinely where people are at are near transit terminals that are providing transit passengers, especially in the Bay Area. We don't have a lot of rural area that we're gonna focus on. I could see doing something like, you know, building permanent transit, going to permanent transit areas and maybe having a couple emergency floats in case one of our floats or our centers gets damaged where we have to put something like that in. I know we use that down by Chase Center and stuff. I think those things are very reliable. You know, obviously it's a storage issue, but manpower to set it up and stuff like that. But you're not having a fixed facility that's going to cost a lot of money to upkeep, and you're probably not going to get any kind of federal or state funds to do that because I see how that works all the time. So I definitely like the approach that we're using. I know in the past we've talked about if we're going to do something like this, you know, one of the things that came up during RM3 when we had our discussion with Assemblymember Frazier at the time was, you know, the possibility of building transit areas, but you know, that local government, we put in the facility, they provide us with some kind of incentive to run ferries to it, you know, but still looking at where we're going to run service to. The other thing that I think we should consider is if something did happen today or tomorrow or whatever, you know, we're going to pick people up and take them somewhere and dump them. Like you can't, there's more than the ferry terminals we have that are fixed structures now. We can get, you know, buses and transit into those areas to get people back home. Because if you were just taking people and dropping them off somewhere, we're just moving a problem from one area to another area. That's going to be an issue because more than likely, like I said, we're going to be trying to get people probably out of San Francisco would be my guess, back to the East Bay or to their homes. And then what do you do with them if you had a facility that you really didn't operate or didn't use because it was just there for an emergency? We need to have something where we know we're going to drop people off. And then part of the plan needs to be, once you drop them off, how are you getting them back out of there if roads and, you know, they're not able to use their vehicles or whatever approach happens. So my 2 cents on it for the discussion and the 2 questions you have up there is I like the approach that WETA has. It'll be nice that we have RM3 funds to maybe expand that. And then the second thing that I think I would put out to everybody is it's hard to do a job like this when it's spread out across the staff that just, you know, isn't focused on emergency. And so what you guys are doing and everybody is doing as a team is awesome. So I know it's a huge learning curve, but I'll help where I can on discussions, but I think these are good topics. I think at some point we're going to be used, and they're going to call on us to, you know, it'll be somebody will come in and say, we need all the boats and, you know, we're going to work under somebody else. But those are kind of my 2 cents on it. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Who's up next? Vice Chair.
So first and foremost, I want to commend you on a great presentation. Thank you very much. You articulated everything really, really well. And I really appreciate that. And I really like that you all are continuing to think outside the box. It's been 34 years since Loma Prieta. So I can just tell you from the history I've done of the Bay, we've never not responded to a major emergency like Loma Prieta and the 1906 earthquake from the Bay. It's always been from the Bay. And so one of the things we didn't cover in this is what's the cost differential between those standards. I'm somewhat aware of it from my prior life, but I think to the point that Director Del Bono was making, and certainly my own experience, the public is going to expect us to take them to where we have a landing. They're not going to understand the differences. And while I know that our plan envisions a lot of landings that potentially could be very close together from the land side, if you start digging in to the viability of the land side, it's anybody's guess how viable that's going to be following a major seismic event, particularly on this side of the bay. If you study the port studies, so I like this thinking, but I tend to think that we are here as an agency in perpetuity. Building to these standards helps us to have our assets have a longer lifespan. And unless there was some really compelling reason to not continue that from a financial make it or break it point of view, I'd fall down on the side of being dual purpose because I think that's our mandate. And that's the benefit and value we bring to the general population. And having had to evacuate people from San Francisco by ferry, and you have no idea what you're in for until it happens, right, Kevin?
Director Alba?
I think, yeah, great thinking. If clearly we serve a regional purpose. And if the region wants specific landings that are not identified for transit purposes, and we have the staff and grants to implement it in the future, should. And so I think it's in partnership with MTC and all of the Bay adjacent organizations and communities to decide what grants to go after, what funding sources and future regional measures to go after in regards to resilience, sea level rise, seismic activities, whatever it is, right? If it's determined on the regional level that WETA is the best facility to, or best agency to push through the construction of a facility, and we are assigned the proper staff and funding of resources that we need for that, and we should do that. So for me, the option 4 should be part of the vision. And I think, again, it's not the agency making unilateral decisions. We serve the region, and we should work with the region to figure out what the phasing of such an expansion of our authority and financial resources and staffing resources are.
Okay, thanks very much. Good point. Director Du, did you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. I agree with a lot of the comments that were said, and I agree that the hybrid approach definitely seems the way to go. I think it's important that as we are looking at expanding coverage every way that we can for the region, both from a transit perspective and an emergency preparedness perspective, that we are going after those planning grants to set it up, and then the capital improvement project grants that we can obtain as well. So I think it's important that we are focusing on both the emergency preparedness as well as the transit coverage expansion, and just trying to seek that funding, whether it's through federal, whether it's through the regional, the state. I don't think we can not look at all of the opportunities, and perhaps, I don't know, I heard that we don't have a full-time position for that, for the emergency side of it. Maybe that is something we should consider in the future.
Thanks, Director. Back to Director Alba.
Yeah, the one thing that I forgot to mention was that we're hearing from our regional stakeholders that this is a high priority, that they're desiring to have WETA take a more central role, play a more central role in this, and to be prepared. And I think we need to listen to that. But again, we need to do it within the budget, staffing, grant constraints that we're up against, but not exclude the opportunities that might come before us in the future.
Note, Assembly Member Lori Wilson from Solano County has been charged with chairing a select committee on emergency transportation or transportation emergency. And so we're part of the conversation with her. So there is interest, as there should be in it. And I, further, let me go to Director Del Bono. He's got his hand up.
I was just gonna say, if that's the case, then the real conversation should be coming from Cal OES, and that's who manages disasters. And I can tell you right now, just from knowing people at Cal OES, they really don't have a grasp of even what WETA is. And that's That's really something that we've had a hard time. I think they're starting to understand it from some conversations that have happened in the past. And I know Lauren's done a lot of work and stuff like that. But, I've said this since I've been on the board is, at some point, if that's the direction, then we should be getting direction from the agencies that do have the money and are able to get funding, from the federal government back to us during an emergency. And that specifically is, our Cal OES partners up there. And maybe that needs to be a meeting and a conversation we go up and have with them and say, what do you expect from us? What do you want from us? And, how are you going to fund us? Because I can tell you how it works for the fire department is if they take one of our engines and they take them out of state and put them on a fire, we're now part of Cal OES and we're getting federal or state funding through Cal OES back to our department, and there's pay scales and how much they're paying for equipment, what equipment they're taking. We don't have anything like that. So we could go broke really fast if we don't have something set up that has a funding issue. So I'm all for it as long as, we're talking to the right people, and really it comes down to money and support.
I think what you're saying, Jeff, is kind of a proxy for the greater, screen in which we're seen or not. So, I don't think people really think about the role of a ferry system in emergency response until there's an emergency. And then they think about it an awful lot. And, getting other agencies to think about this in advance of after the emergency, I'll bet we'll get funding. But before the emergency, they're not going to want to think about it too much. They're going to talk about the state deficit, other priorities, and so forth, as we know. That's not to say we can't get it. It's just what I'm saying is we have to kind of own it because we are the ferry system. We are the board. And we know one of these days, and we hope not, but one of these days, we're going to find ourselves in this position. History would dictate that. So, I think we should be, the masters of our own domain here and, make the case and charge our federal and our state our lobby, the firms that we hire to represent us, to come up with strategies that we can then begin to pursue. It may take a couple of years, but eventually get to the point where, we're actually, seen in the proper way. Um, I'm all for it. I think there are certainly a lot of limitations. Monique brought up the point about what does this all cost? Ron Cowan wanted to have a sworn firefighter on every boat. That's what he's insisted on. Ron, you know how much that's going to cost? But that was what he believed. And, that maybe that's too much. Certainly would cost a lot. But, what's the cost when the emergency happens and people are lined up at the waterfront and they can't get out or there's nowhere to go? I mean, I've been riding the ferry a lot during this period of time when it's been windy and rainy, and it's worked great, but they take a different route every time. Wow, look where we are. Well, why are they doing that? Because the bay is different every time. You don't know. You can't predict where it's going to be choppy and where you need to be until you're there, and then they can make decisions about that. So I think it's going to be a lot like that, to the point, is we don't know where we're going to be, where the emergency landing is going to be. The emergency landing may not be, a functional area at that time, but some other area that we didn't set up for it might be functional. So, I'm a bit on the side of on the side of caution, but that is a lot of money to do that. So, that's the equation I think we're trying to solve. Let me turn it over to the public for any comments. Has anyone signed up to speak on item 11? It's an information item.
No one has signed up online.
Thanks. Would anyone like to speak on this item?
Doesn't look like anybody who's remote.
Looks like a not. Okay, well, thank you very much for engaging us in the conversation. It's really very thoughtfully done. So let's turn to the final item on the agenda, which is public comments on non-agenda items. Has anyone signed up to speak on an item not on the agenda?
Nobody has signed up to speak.
Anyone like to make a comment at this point? Okay, with that, I shall adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for comments. I thought it was a very solid set of discussions today. So well prepared. Thanks, staff. Thank everybody. Thank my board colleagues. Well done.